All right, welcome to the first of its kind, world-changing manufacturers network. Lisa Ryan has her ears to the ground and her heart in the game. Get ongoing education and new connections right here with Lisa and the Manufacturers Network. Buckle your seat, listen, and spread the word. Here's Lisa.
Hey, it's Lisa Ryan. Welcome to the Manufacturers Network podcast. I'm here today with Mark Lilly. Mark is president and CEO of Lilly Works, and he helps manufacturers to solve the late problem. I'm going to let Mark explain a little bit more about what that is. But in the meantime, Mark, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Lisa. Appreciate you inviting me on.
So share with us a little bit about your background and what led you to working with manufacturers and creating Lilly Works.
Sure. We've been doing this quite a long time, and we refer to the team behind Lilly Works. It's a family endeavor. My dad actually started a number of manufacturing ERP systems, one in the 1980s called Profit Key, another called Visual Manufacturing in the 90s, currently owned by Infor. And they're both designed for make-to-order, high-mix manufacturing type of companies used by thousands of manufacturers. And they both also had really very strong traditional finite scheduling embedded in them. What we found, however, was that in spite of this great functionality in either of these products, and what we've since learned really in any ERP system or bolt-on that has this traditional approach to scheduling and managing production, is that most manufacturers really struggle with it for a number of reasons.
Okay.
Yeah, so a few years ago, I'll get to the next one. So a few years ago, 2014-15 timeframe, the team got together and we actually started a third manufacturing ERP system up in the cloud, that sort of thing. And as we were designing it, recognizing that while that scheduling functionality was good and the previous folks struggled with it, we said, what can we do differently? So we came up with an entirely different approach to managing production. So both from a material standpoint and a scheduling standpoint. And we called this approach, or the software part of it, called it protected flow manufacturing. The approach is the dynamic production method. And we would go out into the marketplace and show folks the ERP really liked this approach to managing production, but they didn't necessarily want to replace their ERP right now. So because that's so much work. What we did was we actually extracted that part of the software, made it its own product offering called protected flow manufacturing that ties into any ERP system, whatever you're using today. So what's nice about that is we can go right into a company and help them in very short order. We're talking 6 to 8 weeks and solve the late problem, right? Give them now visibility in production of their true priorities, of when if material is here or not, to even execute the priorities. And so everybody can see and know what they should be working on. And also future visibility. So that is, when is my customer going to be able to get their order based upon my capacity and my material availability out in the future.
So what exactly is the late problem, and what is the extent of the problem that you're seeing?
Sure. A lot of companies are struggling with this today. And very simply, it's not being able to get their orders out on time when they wanted to. I actually just did a presentation out at IMTS in Chicago last week, and I pulled together some macro data. And the reality is that across American manufacturing, there's over $1 trillion in unfulfilled orders just in the month of July. That was the latest statistics that came out of basically the Fed. And that's about half of the entire manufacturing GDP, gross domestic product. To put that into context, the manufacturing GDP is just over 10% of the national GDP. So there's a tremendous amount of opportunity. And I think really anyone who works in a manufacturing company realizes and experiences this, that whether it's for material and the supply chain issues we're having, internationally, whether it's the workforce and not being able to find people. Most companies are struggling with they would be able to ship if they had capacity and if they had better management of what's going on, better visibility of what's happening in their production environment.
Well, I think about with the late problem, and the first thing that came to my mind was, okay, supply chain, everybody's struggling with supply chain. We can't get parts. They're sitting in ports in LA or whatever whatever we've been seeing the last couple of years. How can people turn that around when a lot of people are just thinking, well, that's just part of the process right now? It seems that if somebody could turn around, that would really make them stand out from everybody else too.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's making folks look, because even before all that happened, folks still struggled with getting their orders out on time. People realize this. So I think it's really just shining a light even more so on the issue. And that a lot of it can be helped internally if they truly had visibility of when materials were coming in, or even if they had the materials right now, and also what their priorities should be. Priorities based on the dependencies of what they're manufacturing and what jobs or what work orders are truly most in danger of being late, rather than trying to schedule things based on a due date. And this is one of the things we find in a high mix environment in particular and most scheduling programs or tools will attempt to prioritize your work on due date. Well, especially in a high mix environment, you will have jobs that are due earlier, but that are less in danger of being late just by the nature of how much work needs to happen on a job and whether it needs to go outside or back, and this type of thing. So you could have a job that's due 2 months from now that's much more in danger of being late today if you don't get started on it than a job that's due even a week from now.
So how would you even figure that out?
That's a great question. That's really what we do is we go in and work with whatever data they have, whether it's in an ERP system or not. And we bring that into an approach where we create what we call an execution plan for every work order. So you can see how much work needs to be done for the quantity that you're making, when the due date is, right? And then there's actually, and whether folks realize it or not, they're actually using a lot of buffer time. So when you ask somebody, hey, what lead time are you quoting your customers? They may say 6 weeks. And then you ask the follow-up question to that. It's okay, of that 6 weeks, how much time is actual production time, right? Touch time that's going to be on a machine, or somebody's going to be specifically adding value to it. That's typically their estimates of the routing from this operation steps that needs to get done. So what you often find is on a 6-week type of lead time job, the actual touch time is a fraction of that, sometimes only a week, sometimes days, sometimes even hours. So companies are using a fair amount of buffer time between the actual time that's going to be needed and the due date. So we consciously look at that. We work with the clients on that to say, is that, say, 5 weeks of buffer time, is that working for you? Or is it too much? In which case, maybe we have an opportunity to reduce that, or maybe it's even too little, and maybe you need to expand that a little bit. Be conscious about how much buffer time you're putting in there. The dynamic is then that execution plan is going to flex based upon the quantity, which lead times don't. Lead time is a static type of piece of information, but really that should be flexing based upon the quantity. And then that also designates when you need materials up front and when that job should start. Okay. Now, when the job should start is really important, because the other thing we often find is manufacturers have this idea in production that, as soon as we have material, let's get it out into production, because then it'll come out the other side as quickly. No, you don't want to flood WIP with too much work. There's actually a principle called Little's Law, which says that the more things or items in a system, the longer period of time any of those items are going to be in the system. Good example is simply a highway. I live in the DFW area. And as you can imagine, during rush hour, we've got certain 5-lane highways, and you come over the on-ramp, right? All these brake lights, and you're going to be on that strip of highway, say it's for 5 miles for 20, 25 minutes because there are so many cars on that highway. The flip side is you come up in the middle of the day or at night and everybody's flying by you. There's much fewer cars, so you're going to be on that strip of highway for 5 minutes or less. The same way in a production environment. The more work orders, the more jobs, more material you send out into production, there's so much traffic. The longer the wait times are going to be on each of the work centers, the longer period of time it's just going to take to get through. That's why there's a lot of expediting at the end of the month and this sort of thing. So you don't want to starve production, certainly, but you want to control how much you send out. And when you do that, whatever is in production then has the best chance to flow through its work centers as quickly as possible to then shorten your lead time and get out faster.
So that certainly sounds like some of the struggles that manufacturers are having with that traditional method of managing their production. But what are some of the other struggles that you're seeing that they're having when they're doing it the old way?
Sure. So one of the things is the traditional scheduling model is that you're running a computer program, right? You have to run a computer algorithm to get your plan, right? So you try to set up your parameters as best you can. You run this computer program that some folks may understand exactly what it's doing, others may not. And then you get your list then of priorities from the program, from this plan. And even if there's no such thing as a perfect plan, but let's suppose you did have a really good plan you liked. Once that gets to the reality of production, and especially in a high mix environment where things are changing constantly, then something does change, whether a customer calls and changes a due date, a tool breaks, your best setup person doesn't show up, right? So that beautiful plan that you had now doesn't make sense anymore. So it's probably not worth very much. So we realized there really needs to be a dynamic production method that recognizes and acknowledges and even anticipates that change is going to happen, and change happens constantly in a production environment. So instead of doing that, instead of trying to come up with a plan and execute based on that, using that individual execution plan for every work order, every job, as I've described, that actually also calculates a real-time priority. And it's very simply using where we are today and how much on the execution plan, how much work is remaining, whether it's all the work or just a portion of it. And then from that, how much time protection or buffer do we have left to our due date? We call that a threat level. So based upon that ratio, how much in danger of being late is each one of your jobs? And we publish that in real time out in production so that everybody in every department, in every work center, on every machine can see and knows exactly which job they need to be working on right now, what the top priority is, regardless of the due date, right? Because as we described, there may be jobs that need your attention now that are due later rather than other jobs.
So how much do you think that this is costing the average manufacturer to have this late problem happening?
That's a great question. As I mentioned, on a macro level, it's in the trillions. When you ask most individual manufacturing companies, and if they're being honest, most will recognize that they're maybe in the 80s percentile in terms of on-time delivery, and many struggle with being in the 60s or 70s or even lower. So it's not easy, but you can imagine, and actually we can pull their data in and show them what it would mean to be able to ship on the extreme if they were, and they could do this math as well, certainly by looking at their backlog, if they were able to ship everything on time, what that would mean from a revenue standpoint. But knowing that they're not, that they're going to be 30% or even 20% of their orders are not going to make that deadline mark, they're going to fall into a later period. What is the financial impact of doing that? So you can imagine there's a tremendous opportunity. If you can shift the bar even a little bit, so if you can go from even 70 to 80, 90 percentile, just that change. Now you're shifting when you're going to be able to recognize that revenue as well. And it's a tremendous financial impact to a company.
So when manufacturers are shifting and going to that dynamic production method, what are some of the results that they're seeing?
That's a great question. So there's basically three components, and I've touched on all of those in a different order. One is anticipating variability. So making sure you're acknowledging you're using a buffer today and talking about that, right? Where should that be in terms of when we start jobs, when we need materials? So anticipating that variability, using the right priority. So instead of using due date to schedule, using a risk level, how much in danger of being late or of having a stock out if you're a make to stock type company are you? So that's the second one. And then the third is controlling WIP, right? How much WIP? So what we see is once the method is in place and you're doing all three of those things, there's almost an immediate reduction in work in process. So if you are in a situation where and many manufacturers do just by walking out on the floor, they realize we've just got too much WIP out here. There's just so much. There's an immediate reduction that happens in just a few weeks. And that's a tremendous cost savings, right? So you can literally go to the cost accountant or the CFO of the company and ask them, how much WIP are you carrying right now? And with this approach, we're able to reduce that in very short order. Just do the math, 30%, even 40% of your WIP gone within a few weeks. That's a tremendous cost savings. But then the even bigger part of that is being able to get work out faster with the resources, the machines and people you're already using or paying for today. And now that becomes a contribution margin equation, or some people call that a throughput dollars equation, where whatever, and with our tool set, you can also see this as well financially. You can see if I'm doing things the way I'm doing things now, I can see how many dollars I'm going to be able to ship. But if I were able to make these improvements or I'm getting things out faster, how much more in a given time period would I be able to ship, both from a revenue standpoint, but even more powerfully from a contribution. The neat thing about contribution margin is that any additive contribution margin you're able to bring in a given period, by definition, goes right to the bottom line. So it's a direct profit increase to the company. So it's a very powerful lever to help a company grow and improve their financials.
When you have a high mix manufacturer, and face it, nobody has enough time to do anything today. Everybody's plates are overflowing. How would you even start the process to prioritize as far as figuring out where your biggest risks are and even knowing where to start?
That's a great question. And companies are in different stages of being able to implement something like this, right? So we go into some companies that already have an ERP, all their routings and their data are really pretty accurate. They reflect the way production is happening, and we can tie it, but they're still struggling with the scheduling components of it or material visibility. We can tie in very quickly, and within a few short weeks, they can get those priorities in the future view we talked about. There are other companies, and I've been in several of them even recently, where they may have a system, but whatever data is in there, they don't really believe it, either from here's how production really happens. Maybe those routings were set up from a costing standpoint that accounting used, but when you get out to the shop floor, that's really not how material flows. So they need to rework those. And then there are dependencies oftentimes, manufacturers who make a complex product where there are sub-assemblies involved. So are those sub-assemblies being built specifically for a parent, so they need to be aligned very tightly? Or are they common parts, common sub-assemblies that maybe even need to be stocked, in which case they also need to be aligned, but a little bit differently to make sure they're going to match whatever the first parent is that's going to need them. So that does need to be looked at. The good news is now we can't create data out of magic, but most folks either have it in their heads, and they often have it on spreadsheets. That's what we often see, where folks have struggled with the traditional scheduling model. They have scheduling in their ERP. They may have even purchased a bolt-on. They've just struggled with it, and they revert back to spreadsheets. So the good news is we can take those spreadsheets as well and use that as a data source to help them move forward in this direction.
Is there some kind of trigger or sign or something to pay attention to that, wow, this is an issue that we need to take care of right away? Is there like a time frame, or anything again that would be like that siren that, hey, this is something you should be paying attention to right now? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. If companies aren't already monitoring or measuring their on-time delivery percentage, so even if they're not formally doing that, there's likely a couple few folks in the company who are aware with how good or not that is. Certainly sales, customer service. And that's really where the issue raises its head, is with that customer relationship management, right? Whether it's an existing customer who's complaining about not meeting the due dates that they had established with you, or not being able to win new business because the lead time, if you're being honest and you're quoting a lead time, it may be longer than some of your competitors.
And face it, nobody on the planet likes change at all. So if you're bringing this kind of change into a manufacturing plant, how do you get buy-in from the employees to let them know that this isn't one more program that's going to fail in the next couple of weeks, or that this really is going to help them? How do you incorporate the system so that everybody sees the value and benefits?
That is a great question and a key question. So typically, we don't get to the point where there's a financial commitment from the client to move forward without at least introducing this to production and getting some in that regards. But to your point, we have encountered situations. In fact, we've got a Modern Machine Shop article out there about keeping scheduling on track. About that very point, we implemented this. We got management's buy-in. We had the big screen TVs and the workstations out in production showing the real-time priorities. Everything was wonderful. And a couple 8 weeks went by, and management was saying, "Look, nothing's changed. We're still, the on-time delivery is the same. Our WIP seems to be the same." So we did a deeper dive and realized, yeah, we hadn't gotten buy-in with the production folks. They were still using their old methods, whether it's a piece of paper or a spreadsheet or their whiteboard, whatever the case may be. So we rebooted, we got things, we went back in with the management team. We needed to get there were two, two leads in particular. We needed to get them on board. Once we worked with them, they saw the power of it. They saw the new visibility they were going to get and got them on board, and they brought everybody else on board. About a year later, I went to a Modern Machine Shop Top Shops conference, invited them in, and invited the president, the owner, to speak at my presentation. And probably the most powerful part of the presentation, though, was they brought their leads. It was only about a 45-person company, and they brought 7 people. And one of the leads stood up and said, "There's no way this company could have brought 7 people, that we could be here for a 3-day conference without this tool in place."
Wow. And the other thing, too, is that when you figure out who your pushbackers are going to be and you focus on them, I'm sure that then they turn into your biggest cheerleaders, like those 2 leads did. But it's like you have to figure out who those people are going to be, get their buy-in, and then rest flows a lot more easily.
You're absolutely right.
All right. So as we're getting to the end of our time together, if somebody is curious and wants to continue the conversation with you, what does that look like as far as your process and bringing people on board?
Sure. Certainly, if you're ready to have a chat, I'm at mark.lilly, Lilly, at lilyworks.com. So feel free to email me. On the other hand, if you're just curious and want to educate a little bit more, we have a lot of resources on our website. So you can go to lilyworks.com/PFM or Protected Flow Manufacturing. That'll bring you right into our product page, where there's a short 3-minute video that kind of introduces this concept. If you're interested in more depth, we have a number of recorded webinars and some of my presentations. In fact, my presentation from IMTS last week was actually recorded. Not quite available yet. It's going to take them a few weeks to get that out, but that'll be on the website as well. There are also a number of more testimonials that are out there as well on the website.
All right, Mark, thank you so much for joining me today. It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you, Lisa. I enjoyed it very much.
I'm Lisa Ryan, and this is the Manufacturers Network Podcast. We'll see you next time. Thanks for listening to the Manufacturers Network Podcast. do me a favor and share this podcast with your friends and colleagues so we can grow this network and connect more fantastic folks just like you. You can either send your buddies to the website at manufacturers-network.com or share the Manufacturers Network podcast on your LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, or wherever you and your industry friends hang out. The bigger and faster we grow the network, the stronger and deeper the community we'll all have. Thanks again, and I appreciate you.